We're really getting into fall, and a lot of my folks up north are starting to think about putting their boat up for the season and starting the modification process. The summertime is really good for going out, testing, fishing, having fun, but fall and winter are really good for boat modifications. And you guys know I like batteries. This is my total collection of batteries, and I just sold two, so I did have more, and I've actually got another one coming in the mail. So I'm going to talk about everything you need to know about marine batteries, from lithium to lead acid, from the amp hourage, from electronics to cranking batteries, everything. And first, let me go through what I've got here. I've got a 12 amp hour, I've got a 30 amp hour, I have a 100 amp hour Bluetooth, I have another 100 amp hour. This is another 100 amp hour Bluetooth. And then this back here hiding is yet again another 100 amp hour. Now, you might be saying, Grayson, you have enough batteries. Why do you have more? Well, I own a fishing charter and we need a lot of batteries. Point being is I have reviewed basically all of the major players in the game on this channel, and this is just what I currently have right now. I have sold probably 15. So with my marine battery qualification badge out of the way, let's dive into it. First, let's talk about why you do not want a lithium battery. What scenario do you want to avoid lithium batteries at all costs? Keep in mind, every single battery you're looking at right now is a lithium battery. Now, the one and only situation that you should never use a lithium battery is for a cranking battery. Cranking batteries need to be lead acid. Why? I don't know. The technology is advancing quickly, the prices are dropping, and I'm sure that will change in the next few years. But for now, the current technology, you have to use lead acid for a cranking battery. So if you have a traditional boat and you turn it over, that battery has to be not only a lead acid, but a cranking battery in specific, not a lead acid 100 amp hour deep cycle, a cranking battery. I see a lot of folks use cranking batteries for their trolling motors, or, actually, now that I'm thinking about it, my very first battery on my very first boat, on my very first trolling motor, was a cranking battery, and that cranking battery left me stranded after 30 minutes. Don't use a lithium deep cycle to start your boat, and don't use a boat starting battery to run your trolling motor. That is a very common mistake. It's tempting, they're cheap on the shelves, they're everywhere in auto parts stores. Know what you're buying. Here is a highly rated, affordable cranking marine battery. I'm going to link all my recommendations on every single category in the links below, so definitely check that out. All right, number two, why are lithium batteries completely overtaking lead acid in every category aside from starting batteries? Well, that is because, first of all, I had a 50 amp hour lead acid battery. 50 amp hours lead acid. That weighed about 55, 60 pounds. I just sold all my 50 amp hours because I don't really need them, and I have plenty of batteries, but my 50 amp hour batteries on average weighed about 11 pounds. So 50 amp hour lead acid, 60, 50 amp hour lithium, 11. Huge difference. And they're smaller. Point being is these lithium batteries are way, way lighter. For example, this 100 amp hour lithium right now, group 24, this weighs about 25 pounds. This one weighs about 25. This battery is about 30. And I'd say this one back here is anywhere from 25 to 30 as well. Versus, the 60-pound lead acids. They're really heavy. These are much lighter. So that makes a big difference, especially in small vessels where weight distribution is so important, especially if you have a bow mount trolling motor and you have a super heavy 100 amp hour lead acid. Okay, so number one, lithium has the huge advantage over weight. Also, let's talk about actually using it. You buy a 100 amp hour lithium battery, you get to use 100 amp hours. Here's the big secret that people don't realize. When you buy a lead acid and AGM battery, you can only use 50 to 60% of that battery before you not only start losing voltage, performance, and speed, but actually harming the battery the next time you charge it up and use it. Now, listen to this. This, I can use 100% of the 100 amp hours. But my lead acid battery, I only used 50%. So you're paying for 100 amp hours with lead acid, but you're only getting 50. You're only getting 50% of the amp hour rating that you paid for. So if you're sitting there watching this video right now, and you've got a 100 amp hour lead acid powering your bow mount trolling motor in your boat right now, you actually only have 50 amp hours of usable battery. Now let's move into number three, another reason why I prefer lithium batteries over it all. is what actually happens when you go below 50% battery on your lead acid. What happens? Well, the second you turn on your lead acid and you start using it, it's actually creeping down in voltage. And once you hit 50 amp hours out of 100, you go below the 12 volt mark, which is what most trolling motors require. So once you go below that 12 volt mark, you're underpowering your trolling motor. You're getting to 11.9. You're getting to 10 volts and below. And if you're running less than 12 volts, one, you're underpowering and potentially damaging your motor. Two, you're going even slower. Trolling motors are super slow. My fastest vessel with a trolling motor goes 4 miles an hour. If I was running at 10 volts, I'd be going like 2 miles an hour. You do not want to go any slower than you already have to go. Huge disadvantage to lead acid, and why the lithium technology, just another reason it is superior for deep cycle applications. Lead acid has left me stuck, and one time I used 60% of my lead acid and I had 40% remaining. Well, the wind wasn't too bad, but the tide was flowing, and I was going about a half a mile an hour, and I had to get around this pier, and I was just using my trolling motor. I was in fairly shallow water, but I had 50% remaining battery life left, but I was running like 11 to 10 volts, going half a mile an hour, and I just barely made it. We almost had to beach the boat and pull it under the pier itself and walk it back to the ramp. That's how bad it was. So after that, I totally stopped. I have literally been stranded multiple times with lead acid. 100 amp hours, 50 amp hours. I mean, it has happened way too many times. Not once have I been stranded or lost voltage with these. Now, you see, they will lose voltage, but not until the last 5%. So you can use 95% battery, then you're going to lose voltage very quickly down to 0 once you hit 0%. Meaning you can use 95%, 95 amp hours before you even see a single drop in speed and performance and voltage. That is huge. And finally, price. A year ago, I wouldn't be saying this, but these are competitively priced. This is my favorite battery right here, and this is my #1 recommendation. This is what I trust on my main charter vessel. This is what I absolutely love. It is the Lithium 100 amp hour lithium deep cycle with the Bluetooth capabilities. Now let me show you why I like this one specifically. First of all, it's in the $200 range. The lithiums are the cheapest ones go even less than $200. I saw a 100 amp hour lithium battery for $170 the other day. So there's no excuse that they are way more expensive. Yes, a year ago they were, but the technology and the competition has exploded and they are super affordable now, making buying a 100 amp hour lead acid, it just makes no sense. But let me show you the benefit of the Bluetooth. So mine's fully charged, but they have an app and it shows you, it's hard to see, the camera's not going to focus on it. But what I'm reading now is it says 100%, it's full, my battery is charged. So my app connects immediately and I can see to the exact percentage how much time I have left on the water. For example, I think it was 2 days ago, I fished out of my Old Town Autopilot kayak, which is trolling motor, Minn Kota, and I fished for 6 hours that day and I covered maybe 3 or 4 miles. I opened up my phone and I had 66% battery remaining. And when I'm running the trolling motor, it will actually tell me the exact power, the voltage, how much amp hour capacity I have left, the total current coming through, as well as the exact amount of time in terms of hours and minutes I have left on the water. This is so helpful, and I never, ever have to worry about being stranded. So getting a Bluetooth battery, this battery right here is also Bluetooth. And I'm actually working on getting rid of everything that isn't Bluetooth because it's that important and that awesome to have. And of course, when you plug it in, you can see exactly how much time is remaining. You can see the health of your battery, the cells, the BMS protection, the temperature, the cycle times, everything, all of the vital information you can see into its brain, which is super cool. So that is going to be my trolling motor recommendation. And if you have a bigger, 70-pound thrust Minn Kota, then you can get the 24-volt versions. And everything still applies, it just goes up in voltage. All my stuff is 12, but same applies for 24 and 36 and so forth. Now let's talk about 100 amp hour versus 50 amp hour, the two major options. All right, everybody watching this video right now, get 100 amp hour. Why not? You have twice as much time on the water, an extra peace of mind. But there are two people that I would actually recommend getting the lighter half size 50 amp hour. And that would be anybody who has a small boat with a bow mounted trolling motor and a gas outboard, meaning anybody with a John boat, a small aluminum boat, the 10-foot palm prowler. And the reason for this is not only weight distribution, weight reduction, but simply storage. If you have a gas outboard on your little boat, then you don't need to rely on the trolling motor full time. You can get away with having a much smaller battery, a much lighter battery, a much more compact battery, because you're not relying on it to drive you 2 miles to your spot. You might sit there and put it from setting 2 to 4, holding position or going down a bank. But at the end of the day, you're not using it as your only method of transportation. So then I would recommend getting a much smaller, cheaper, more compact 50 amp hour lithium. I did a whole video on my favorite 50 amp hour lithium. Like I said, I got rid of it because all of my vessels require 100 amp hour. But my favorite one right now is it's going to be either the 50 amp hour version of the Lifetime or the Redodo. I really like their app as well. And theirs is really, really, really affordable. The 50 amp hour Redodo lithium Bluetooth battery. I've made a video with it before, but that is going to be my 50 amp hour recommendation. So if you have a gas outboard and you just simply want to save weight, you want weight distribution to not be so heavy on the bow, get yourself a 50 amp hour and save yourself the headache. Also, kayakers. Now, my kayaks don't apply. I own 4 Old Town Autopilot 120s, and they have the fancy Minn Kota trolling motors with spot lock and all that stuff. And, it requires a lot of energy. So I do the 100 amp hour because my kayaks are not actually meant to be paddled. They have paddles, but they're ultra wide. They're super heavy. I mean, these are like fully loaded 180-pound kayaks, but it's because they're motorized. But if you're doing a DIY build, if your kayak isn't built to house a massive battery in the center of the boat, then you're going to want to go with a smaller battery. Plus, a lot of people who do DIY trolling motor installs, of course, they put them on kayaks that are initially designed to be paddled or pedaled. Otherwise, they would have a trolling motor to begin with. So you don't even need to use your trolling motor or rely on your trolling motor full time. Maybe you're just using it to transport yourself to your spot, and then from there, you're using the extra quiet method of paddling around or pedaling around. So that is the only other situation if you have a small boat with a gas outboard, or if you have a DIY kayak trolling motor build, which is getting really popular, and your kayak simply wasn't built to house a heavy, ginormous 100 amp hour. Then 50 amp hour makes way more sense. And if you run out of battery, no problem. You're still in a kayak designed to be pedaled or paddled. All right, we've got cranking batteries out of the way. We've got lead acid versus lithium. We've got 100 amp hour versus 50 amp hour. Now let's talk about powering your electronics. Now on my tiny boats, my 12-foot John boat and my 10-foot pontoon boat, I actually just use a Garmin Striker 4 $120 downscan fish finder from Garmin, just from Amazon, and I love it. And that does not require much power at all. So what I actually do for that is all of these batteries have battery boxes, by the way, besides these. These go into the hull of my kayaks. But, all my I have 3 battery boxes sitting down behind me. You probably can't see it. When I go to plug in my trolling motor on my small boats, I actually just plug my fish finder directly into my 100 amp hour and directly into my 50 amp hour, if that's what I'm using that day for a video or a test or whatever. It draws such little power, it makes no difference on speed, performance, voltage, or really battery life. It's just powering this little monitor and this little tiny transducer, and my small downscan fish finder, I just run directly off of my main battery, especially because in a tiny boat that's not made to house a bunch of electronics, I don't want a big battery and then another separate fish finder battery. A lot of folks do it, but it's just flat out not necessary, at least for my setup. Now, let's move up a little bit in my kayaks. One of my kayaks has a Garmin 73 Echo Map, and it has down and side imaging, and this is a much bigger screen, a much more complex system, and it's just night and day difference from the Garmin Striker 4, the Peewee. So this one, I do have an independent battery. Of course, in the kayak, I have a 100 amp hour lithium running the motor, but for my down and side scan for the Garmin, I have this lithium 12.8 volt 12 amp hour, and this is perfectly fine. I have a quick connect terminal. This goes into the hull of my kayak, and this is the little cheap battery that I use to power my Garmin 73 with down and side imaging. Not tapping into the same battery, but we have it on its own separate power supply, and I've never ran this thing down, and it's only a 12 amp hour. These are super cheap, so I do recommend that for more complex systems. But I do bump up to a 30 amp hour on my main personal, like the kayak that I personally use if I go take it out. This is the one that I prefer taking out. It's live scope. So it powers my live scope, the black box, and my Garmin 106. It's a 10-inch Garmin. This is a much more complex system. This sucks way more juice. I'm definitely not going to tap into my 100 amp hour, and the live scope is too much. I would only have just a little bit of functional use with a 12 amp hour. So if you have a super high powered system that requires a lot more power like live scope, then I highly recommend you go all the way up to a 30 amp hour minimum. Now, let's say you're a bass angler and you've got $60,000 in electronics or whatever. Well, then maybe you do want a 50 amp hour or even a separate 100 amp hour battery just for your electronics if you're powering bilges. You've got 6 transducers, all the crazy stuff people are doing with 4 graphs. That is going to obviously be a lot more of a suck. There's some people that have multiple live scopes on their vessels, and they simply just need a giant battery only for their electronics, a giant battery only for their trolling motor, and a giant cranking battery. Anyway, guys, I hope this helped. We have talked about cranking, lithium, deep cycle, graphs of all different sizes, of all different power, and I think that we have covered everything, even Bluetooth and non-Bluetooth. This has been your ultimate guide to buying marine batteries for your vessels, whether it's kayaks, john boats, or big boats. All of my recommendations for everything from the cranking battery to the 100 amp hour Bluetooth, all the way to the live scope and just the budget regular down inside imaging fish finder battery. Everything will be linked below. Thank you guys for hanging out. Stay tuned for more in-depth tiny boat videos or just boating videos in general. Like, subscribe, and I'll see you next time.